Hi, I'm William, and if you're listening to this on the GoPed podcast, welcome. If you're seeing this via my company website, also welcome. Uh, your business. It's a simple phrase, but I wanted to take the opportunity to look at an end-to-end business so you could kind of get an idea, even in a very simple business, how complex things can get really quickly. A number of people during the time at home that we've had decided that they wanted to start a clothing line or some kind of a home-based business. People like the idea of working at home, and rightly so. But once you get into the complexities and the costs and sometimes the inconveniences, home-based businesses, although being a really good way to introduce you to the concepts involved in running a business, are also huge rabbit holes that you dump money into, and you don't really realize at the beginning that that's the way it's going to be. So, starting with your business, you have a product. We won't say it's clothing. Any product, however, you have to understand one thing. Do you have a customer base that is willing and able to purchase your product at the price that you need to sell it at? Now, that also seems simple, but that one basis covers all of the aspects end to end on your value chain that you're going to have and put into your product to then sell to somebody else. And they're going to determine whether the value that you've put into that product is something that they also value and want to buy. The start of it is evaluating a customer base, and probably the most important one. At this point, it doesn't cost you money except if you're going to go in and actually grab data on customers who might have purchased products similar to the one that you're going to be offering, and then the time that goes into analyzing that data and the potential market that's available for this product. So clothing obviously is a saturated market. If you wanted to go into clothing, it's an extremely tough business. You have competitions on all different levels. You have private boutiques who are going to be their own designers, and they're going to make their products, and they're going to have storefronts on Melrose in LA, probably less so now. It's going to be a little bit different. But you have folks who are also going to sell all of their clothing lines online, and they're going to have online followings. You have the larger department stores that are going to sell brand names more as a distribution and a retailer. And of course, you also have the larger department stores who have their own private labels. And they're going to be selling all of theirs, and you're going to be competing with them as well. Your overall look when you're starting this has to be, where do I fit into this niche? Am I going to try to compete with the high-end ones, and I'm going to try to sell a pair of blue jeans for $250 or $300? Or am I going to try to compete on the low end, and I'm going to try to compete with, say, Walmart's, where you can do a pair of blue jeans probably for maybe $40? And are you able to actually do that? Or do you fit somewhere in the middle? If you just simply believe that your designs, your logos, and your company has a cool name, you're going to develop a cool image, and people are going to just jump onto it, it's probably not going to happen. That's not to say that it can't, but it probably isn't. In order to take some route like that takes substantial capital investment up front. The reason being is because, once again, you're searching for a target market that you just don't know about yet, and you need to drive people to your product and create awareness of it, and then let them determine whether or not they're going to be your customer base. It's a difficult thing to do. If you take the route where you decide where you're going to be positioned in the overall market and where you'd like your brand image to be, then perhaps you can determine whether there's a segment, who you're going to market it to, and the best places to put your money to actually do the marketing. That kind of brings me to my next point. Aside from determining your target market, interestingly enough, this next topic covers all of these things. it is this next area is probably the least immediately realizable return, the one area that's most difficult to examine realized returns immediately, and even if they're actually doing you any good, yet at the same time it's absolutely essential for you in any industry when you're creating a product, and that's your marketing plan. It's without marketing, you have no customer awareness, and without awareness, you have no potential for sales. And this is regardless of whether you actually did substantial study previously and determined a market, or just simply decided that you're going to try to plaster your logo everywhere and try to pay celebrities to endorse it and take that route. Obviously, eventually, somewhere you fall in between those two, and you still attempt to make money after pursuing your marketing strategy and the tactics that you're going to use. But nonetheless, marketing is a primary component. I wasn't always a huge fan of the marketing aspect, just simply because being a numbers person, you want to know what you're getting on return. However, the further I went into looking at the microeconomics and the way that you can analyze like your return on advertising to sales and other contributing factors that go into it, the more I appreciated what advertising could do, especially when you layered it up and you had kind of a core strategy and multiple layers to support it. The more that goes into your thought process and planning for this, the more successful you're going to be, and the more narrowed your understanding of your target customer, the better that you can take that strategy and focus all of the money into those who are going to be most likely to see value in your product and actually go ahead and purchase it. And so that brings us into the marketing aspect. Without this, there is no awareness, and you don't have any hope to have any sales at all. And it doesn't really matter how you go about doing this. But to further expand on this, a lot of the internet platforms and people who started clothing lines will take on the social media marketing and use your Instagrams, your Facebooks, or anything in which people are obviously communicating. But when you take that route, the same way that you're going to be competing for sales with anybody else who's got brick and mortar stores at the different levels, and the other online retailers, all of those folks also are all online. So if you put, hashtag clothing, hashtag boutique, hashtag whatever, and you're hoping that it's going to draw people into your product, well, everybody else has that exact same thing going on. And so this is where a multi-layered marketing approach has to take place. And then when you do this, where are you going to drive these people to? Are you going to drive them to an online shop? Are you going to drive them to a brick and mortar, perhaps if you're a boutique? What exactly are you going to do? Where are you going to steer them? And how many different platforms are you going to have, interlinked? Today, you're going to have people who are going to run podcasts, and obviously every single social media site, and maybe they're doing little video clips to also promote their products. And perhaps it's not just advertising, perhaps it's behind the scenes of making the clothing. There's a substantial amount of effort to distinguish yourself, which is all your branding image and branding awareness that all goes into this marketing, before your product even really gets out on the market to be purchased. And these things all need to be considered, because you can't really just have a product sitting on some shelves and hope people are going to come around to buy it, or hope they're going to stumble onto your site at some point in time. The interesting thing is that when you actually do start getting some awareness of your product and people start purchasing it, you can find out right away if this product is something that is going to, I shouldn't say right away, I mean comparatively time-wise right away, because as people purchase a product, if they're really happy with it, the word of mouth advertising is still the strongest form of advertising that there is. they're going to tell their friends are going to tell their friends, and all of a sudden you just kind of see a nice swooping arc, and your sales just kind of start increasing and start taking off, and eventually hit that inflection point where you turn on a whole bunch of people to your product, and you start kind of like collecting a nice bit of market share. Okay. When you actually go in, all right, so now you've kind of considered, okay, we've analyzed the target market, we've decided, okay, this is how we're going to make them aware of our product, and we're going to set up these platforms, and they're going to push them into this area to actually purchase the products. And by the way, where you push them can also be effective, because you can push them to different areas to find out which marketing strategies, which tactics are working best by the number of sales, by the number of views, and so on. You really, somewhere in here, you do still need to keep track of numbers, because you want to make sure that whatever you're building and whatever you're formulating as a strategy is working well. And so now you've got some market awareness going. All right. You now have to look at, and I mean, not at this point, you should have already considered this, but so you have this clothing line. Now, clothing is difficult because clothing has sizes, and just like individual product lines, how much do you make of each size? Where do you start from? How do you go about doing that and making sure that you're not wasting material and wasting cost by making sizes that nobody wants? Well, part of that goes into on really understanding your target customer. Because say for example, you're doing kids clothing. Perhaps one of the best ways to do it, if you're doing kids, and say you're doing maybe toddlers or something, toddlers to maybe 10-year-olds, and you go to a site, perhaps the CDC or something, and it's going to give you the average heights and weights for the different ages, for all the kids in the U.S. or all the kids wherever. I'm not sure if the CDC has it. I mean, there's plenty of different departments that have statistics like this. If you've ever had kids, you realize that the docs go by these charts, such and such an age, there's such and such a height and weight, and so on, and you kind of get an idea of the average size of kids. And so if you're able to do something like that, and you're looking, and I mean, this is just a rough way to go about it, but okay, here's my target segment for kids. They're going to be this age, about this height, this weight. All right, this is my average size right here, and I'm going to have the most of these because this is the average size for a kid this weight, this kid this height, this weight, and so on. And then, since law of large numbers, everything is normally distributed, you then branch off from there. So you have your medium segment, you're going to need this percentage of this, your large, your extra large, and so on. I mean, it's nicely distributed. At least it gives you somewhere to go from initially when you're thinking about how many of each size you would need to have stocked. But this aspect, when you're actually thinking about supply, it goes much deeper. Obviously, the fact that if you were going to stock these things somewhere and warehouse them, it's cost of inventory, and then holding inventory, and then whether the inventory turns over or not. And all of these things can kind of be analyzed and determined, but this is where you're just in time, if you've ever heard this with like Apple or Toyota, came into play, because if they could make products or have the pieces come in right when they needed them, when an order came in, then you could make it and send it out, and you would never have to worry about actually stocking orders. But it's also difficult to deal with variances in demand. If all of a sudden, say you had a small supply of whatever type of clothing you were trying to sell, but it hits it big, and all of a sudden all the moms want to buy your particular line, well, then you have no shirts, no clothes, no pants, whatever available, and the demand is for it, but you're going to lose out on all the demand, you're going to lose out on all these sales because you weren't able to effectively forecast this change in demand. And you can't always do that. I mean, companies play it safe. They want a certain margin of safety. But then again, you don't want to overspend where you then have to turn around and decide whether or not you want to just get rid of and clearance stuff out because it's old models and you need to make room for new models. And so it's just things to think about when you actually have now marketed and you're going to creation. And so that, expanding on the creation aspect, we look at supply chains. Are you going to shop around and see who offers the best deal, materials? Maybe you're going to send it for one place to actually make the t-shirts and the patterns. Maybe you're going to send it somewhere else to actually do any logoing. Perhaps they're able to offer where they ship it directly from the factory for you. Are you going to send it to a warehouse? When you get to that point and you're kind of figuring out what's going on, a lot of these people chose to actually use their garages or use another room to store product. But of course, and that's why some of this stuff, even though you dump money into it and maybe quote unquote wasted money, you can always view it as a learning experience, because if you actually did that, then you learn the cost of carrying inventory firsthand. And it's obviously not all monetary. Some of it is just your mental health. If everything's stuck in a room and you can never use that room for anything else, and you got some clothes that just aren't moving and you're just driving you bonkers, well, that's also a cost to carry. It's not just the materials sitting on the shelf. It's not just them taking up space so you can't bring in new materials. It's not just the fact that you can't use that room anymore. Imagine if you actually then went to go and rent something to hold this stuff because it just drove you nuts. You couldn't do it anymore. Well, then what goes in, or perhaps you bought something or built something. Well, you would then want to insure it because you have product in there. You don't want that, maybe a barn or a shed or whatever you're using, to burn down and then all that product go to waste. So you have to insure it. And then, obviously materials to build it, upkeep perhaps, maybe you get a leak in the roof. All of these things go into, your cost of carry when you have to consider these. And then, however you financed it. If it's your own money, you have to consider the fact that that money you used to put into the product, well, you could have put that money into the market. So, that could be making you money if you would have invested in some other company or something. And you consider cash flow usage that way as well. These are all things that you consider when you're running a business. So if you then have it warehoused and it's sitting somewhere and somebody's holding it and you're paying all these different things for it, you then have to decide, okay, well, how is this getting out? How are we sending it? How are they going to communicate us their orders? And what are we going to do with it? Are you going to ship it UPS, USPS? How are you going to do this? Are you going to have them pay for the shipping? Are you going to pay for the shipping? Are you going to do the shipping and the boxing by hand? Have you calculated in material costs that it's going to cost to box all of these? And then, what else? Tape them up and then send them off. How are you going to handle that aspect? And all companies do this, and it's interesting to have looked at one company. They were actually a flower business, and it was literally, and people don't think of it this way. They think of everything being automated and technological, but orders would come in, and the orders would populate, and they would print off a sheet, and sure enough, that's their ticket right there. That's their packaging for the day. And so you think of things, coming off of assembly lines and being packaged, and the sticker of where it's going to be shipped to just comes off. They slap it on the package and off she goes. And that's just not how it is when you operate a lot of businesses, especially smaller ones, and definitely industry specific. And they all go through the exact same issues that a very small business would have to face themselves too. Now, we haven't even actually really got into the complexities of if your business was slightly larger and you had different areas. Say you had specific people dealing with just your shipping and receiving, and you had people who were just dealing your marketing, and then another department was just trying to deal in your finances and accounting, and what's going to be paid for and how it's going to be paid for, and keeping track of all of that. How are they going to coordinate and talk to each other? That's where the technology and the resource planning software comes in. But the complexities can get deep quickly, And if you try to do this yourself, you definitely could, and it's a small enough operation, mind you, you could run it out of a spreadsheet book. But the more quickly that your business develops, the more quickly that becomes wastes of time and time consuming. Then you really need to evaluate, going back to the technology aspect, evaluate the cost benefit of getting a subscription service or cloud hosting or something of that sort, where you hook in all of your receipts and your purchases and your payables, and something that can help you send your invoices. And that's where all of that kind of bookkeeping software came into play, because a lot of small business could make use of stuff like that. Now, when you get done with the packaging, posting, and sending off of items, the one thing that people oftentimes don't think of: what are you going to do with returns? How do you handle that? And we can also talk about whether or not you're going to include discounts or rebates or things of that nature. And if your distribution channels get complicated, where you're actually providing, where you're selling to wholesalers and then they're to retailers, or maybe you're just direct to retail, or however you're going to determine that, then you would get deeper into whether or not you're going to offer promotional support and rebates and things of that nature for your products. But if you're just simply looking at selling, back to clothing, and you're just going to sell them perhaps online, and people are going to do their orders, and you're sending these things off, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to not allow returns, or are you going to allow returns? And one of the things with clothing is it's the biggest pain in the butt. The industry, gosh, it must have been back late 90s. That was the customer is always right. You learn very quickly that the customer isn't always right, and there are bad customers. It's just a fact, and it's what you're taught, because certain customers cost you substantially more money than other customers. And so you don't necessarily, you're not discriminating against customers, but when certain customers are just going to be an absolute headache. And so you understand your target market, you try to veer away if that's your product, or whatever you're doing. But there's just a fact, certain customers are going to cost you a lot more money to service than other customers, and they may not even be the customers that keep coming back. And so you make evaluation in that aspect as well. The customers who end up being low maintenance and have a lot of orders and keep coming back, those are the ones you want to help. And I mean, that's your customer resource management. And although you plan to cater to both the folks who are just doing transactions and maybe doing long-term business with you, and that's really, you need to do that. You just also need to realize that there can be good customers in both segments of that, and then there can also be bad customers in both segments of that. And I mean, bad is kind of a harsh word. It's just an easier way to describe it, but it comes down to ones that cost a lot more money to service than other ones. And in clothing, you're going to get that right away, and you're going to figure that out right away. As soon as the customers were always right, and I know everybody probably knows somebody who's done this, but they went out, bought something, wore it, and then returned it. That was always a thing in the clothing industry that you had to deal with. I'm not really sure if that, I mean, I'm sure it still probably happens. I just don't know to what degree it happens these days, or if companies have attempted to cut down. I'm assuming they would have, because that whole balance of the customer is always right and being understanding to the customer and still trying to maintain a bottom line has kind of come into more focus, more balance, I think, over the last 10 years or so. But if you're going to get returns, that really, I mean, you're not reselling clothes. You get a return, the odds are, I mean, yeah, maybe if it's not you know, stained or worn, and how do you deal with that? There's a lot of issues that go into that kind of stuff that people just do not consider. And it doesn't even have to be bad stuff. It can just simply be, oh, it was wrong size, or the fabric caused an allergic reaction, or something of this. But you still have to be prepared to eat the costs that go into that, because you consider, all right, how do we handle this? We want to potentially keep the customer because they purchased from us in the first place, which means they obviously were aware of our site, they liked whatever they saw, and you're hoping all of this is true. But now that they're aware of us, we want to make them happy, because potentially they may just buy one thing, but they may be buying something with us for a long time. And now that we've got this customer, we want to keep them. We want to now have them for as long as they're willing to buy our product. And if you look at the cost of attaining customers, it costs substantially more to attain a customer for the first time than it does to maintain a customer relationship to the best of your abilities, which is why if you've ever signed up for something with a company, they keep sending you emails to, hey, come back, because now that they've got your information, you purchased something from them, maybe you're going to do it again, and it's much better for them to maintain that relationship with you. Although more personal is better than less personal. Anyway, so you're dealing with this customer. What do? Do you pay for the return? Do they pay for the return? How do you handle this? Do you offer them a switch out? Do you give them cash back? Do you offer them credit? How are they going to react to these things? There's a number of different considerations that go into this, because every customer that you deal with has the potential to be a raving fan and cheer on your product and tell a whole lot of people about it, or absolutely just wreak havoc on your product because they weren't treated well and didn't like the way you handled that particular situation. Another area in which you've got to kind of consider, I don't want to say data collection, but I mean that's what it is. How did we handle it? How was the reaction? Did they come back to purchase something again within a given amount of time? Things like that you're trying to figure out if the way we handle this was good. And then you might even look at more information about that customer, because if more customers are like that customer, then you handle those customers in the same way, and perhaps a different customer, you're going to handle them in a different way. And so the better that you're able to understand, once again, going back to your target customers, the better you're able to understand your customers, the better service that you can provide. And these are all things that you kind of have to consider. You're not just selling, t-shirts or clothing. You're really, you are if you've gotten to the point where you're actually selling a brand, but at the same time, you can sell a brand that's considered high quality and chic and still have really great customer service. Lexus was, known for that. And so it isn't, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have both, but you need to pay attention. And this, even when you're starting out, in fact, it's probably more important when you're starting out. And this is why I say that, you need to have a product and you need to know your target, but perhaps more important than even having a product is you need to have capital. You need to have capital set aside to invest in an operation, because the product itself won't do it. The marketing itself won't do it. You need the ability to do the customer service on the other end as well. And so there's all of these different aspects that actually go into it. And then when you've kind of gone through and you're starting to evaluate what it is that you're doing, we'll talk about pricing now. I think it's a complex issue, because you have costs that go into a product that you make. And you may outsource an awful lot of the inputs that go into that product, but you're still paying for those inputs. And they teach you different ways to measure costs. It's not simple to measure costs. If you look at activity-based costing, you're looking at variable inputs, which is labor and materials. Variable-based inputs or variable-based costs are just simply things that are going to vary with the number of the product that you have to make. And that should make sense. If you have to make a whole lot of shirts, you need a whole lot of cotton, or whatever you're making them of, and obviously that material cost goes up and up and up. But then per shirt, I mean, that's works out that cost, and then labor that goes into it. Each shirt is going to take a certain amount of time, or a certain amount of sewing machine hours to make a certain number of shirts, which is then going to be divvied up between the shirts. If you do labor kind of that way, then machine hours might be a really good way to measure out costing on shirts if you look at it that way. And then you can kind of look at maintenance in machines. What are you using? How many needles do you go through? And maybe you've got additional thread that goes with it. You have probably a primary thread and a secondary thread, if I remember right, from home economics way back when. but nonetheless, you have other inputs that go into it. If the machines are really complicated, you probably have oil in the machines, maybe you have filters, a number of different things, but nonetheless they have to be maintained, and all of those costs really go into product as well. Now, that isn't to go to the extremes where you then go out into your overhead, because those would be a little bit different than your product costs. It'd kind of go into your period cost, depending on if you're looking at depreciation and insurance costs for the entire warehouse or factory or wherever you're making them. Those costs are a little bit different. And so you really are looking at how do you want to measure the cost of this product that you're making. If you're just looking to pay the contribution to the fixed assets where you put them in, like your equipment and your factory, well, then you're going to maybe accept prices. I mean, this is more for kind of like manufacturing components and using your extra capacity, but you're going. The point is that your pricing is going to be a little bit different than just simply your cost of goods. Because cost of goods, if you've ever looked on your income statement, it also includes other things. It includes depreciation and things things that aren't just direct costs or labor. It's everything that goes in to making that final product. And so that's not always the best way. It's more of an accounting method to kind of account for all of the stuff at the price that you paid for those things, and then you take that away from the revenue, so you kind of understand what you actually made for operating profit. And the reason why they do that is because it ends up being time specific. If you're purchasing commodities to go into some kind of a product, well, the commodity prices are also going to vary. And so you need to kind of look over time to figure out what are you paying that goes into these things. And you can get much more specific in your costs and in how you budget for them and where you went over budget. And when you get into the managerial accounting, it's much more complex, and I shouldn't say much terribly more complex. It's much more involved. And depending on the industry you're in, you might want to look into that sort of stuff. And depending on what it is that you're purchasing and putting into supplies and so on, you might want to consider this. But on a simpler level, if you're just having somebody else make your clothing for you, and like I said, you're stocking them in the shed and you're selling them out, then that might not be as big of an issue. You just simply want to know what you're paying for them and then what you're selling them for. And so at the very bare minimum that you have to cover the costs that are going to make these things, though. You do know that. You can't sell something for less, because then eventually you just run out of money. So you know that you have to at least cover all of the costs that are going in. Now, the biggest bump that you have to understand when you go into pricing something is it just isn't the cost. There's a certain economic component, and you just kind of call it a behavioral component. It's termed value. And if you go shopping, it's the same. You go and you look and you're shopping for a blender. You look at the different blenders and you look at what they're priced, and then what do they do? And you may not even know that much about blenders or what they do, or horsepower, or whatever's listed on there. And you don't know much, but higher numbers are good and lower numbers aren't good. And then you compare what the price is to those higher numbers, and you wonder if at any point in time you're gonna need to blend up big chunks of ice. And you make all of these decisions. Well, your customers do those exact same things when they're looking at your product. And this is important to keep in mind too. If you have to do packaging for your product, what is going to draw their eye and push their observing and reading of your product into the purchasing category? And it's the exact same stuff that you do. So when you do go out and do shopping and you do comparative shopping, you pay attention to what you're doing and what you're comparing. It's important because everybody else does this too. And your customer base is going to do it. So you're selling your clothing, and you get the basics out of clothing. Okay, so there's warmth, and maybe there's a little bit of fashion sense or whatever, but I mean that's not when you're selling clothing on the very basics. You're selling utility. What exactly are you going to use the clothing for, and what do you want to get out of the clothing is perhaps more. If you're buying work clothing, you want clothing that's going to last. You want it to be rough and durable. You don't necessarily want to be wearing, burlap sacks and itchy material, or you want it to be comfortable. That's another value added benefit, but your utility comes in, and it's a huge part of it. And so base, you cover utility aspects, but utility might not just be that. Perhaps if you're going on vacation and you're doing vacation type line for summer, well, maybe they want those cargo shorts for extra pockets when they go on vacation. Maybe they want pockets in their shirts. Like there's these different things that people are going to look at when they're looking at clothing. And utility is kind of your base function. Like, do you like the material? Do you like how it feels? Yeah, it fits that basic need. And then, do you like the colors? How does it feel? How does it fit? Does it have the things that I need, the utility aspects? And then you go beyond that. And for other customers, it's going to be, does it look cool? How does it make me look? How does it make me feel? That's a big one. And then how do other people perceive me in it? Are they worried about the brand? Are they worried about the way it looks and the way it hangs? Are they worried about what other people are going to think when they're wearing it? All of these things all go into whether or not they're going to pay the price that is offered, or that is priced on it. And it may seem some of these things are arbitrary, but once again, if you go clothing shopping, you do the same thing. You put on a pair of jeans, and the first thing you're going to do, look in the mirror, and you're going to well, geez, they look tight, or they look loose, or they only come up to the bottom of my calf, or maybe they're hanging on the floor, or whatever, and you realize that the sizing's not right, the material doesn't feel well, they don't really look like the same bluish color in the mirror, they don't have the stretchiness of the other pants that I have, all of these different things. But these are all going to be considered in pricing and comparing to other competitive products that you're going to have to draw them away from to buy your product. And so clothing is a complex one, and that's why I'm always kind of amazed when people decide to go into that. It's not that it can't be great, but if you're a designer, that's one thing. If you're just trying to sell clothes, that's another, because there's all of these things that go in that people might not think about when they're actually considering it. And so then you try to price it somewhere in there. And this kind of goes into where your positioning that I talked about in the beginning was, are you going to try to compete at what level? And so you're going to attempt to position your pricing and your brand in that area. Are they going to know you for quality, durable, affordable, work clothing? Is that going to be your niche? Or are you going to, attempt to make high-end, high-end, high-quality, perfectly designed, structured, whatever types of shirts and pants, and then you're going to charge premium for it. And if that's going to be your brand, then are you going to be able to get the customer segment that's going to be able to actually find value in that and actually be able to afford it? Are they going to purchase it? And so you can see how all of these different components are interrelated. And this goes in for every single business, every single product they go. And when you find a product that you're going to do this with, do you actually add additional lines? I mean, clothing you have to. And how much is that line going to cost you? Are you going to use it on the same equipment? I mean, if you're not doing it, somebody else is doing it, then they have to worry about taking your order. But delivery times might be important for you. Perhaps they have to run one run at a time, and you have to wait between receiving one and the other, or you need them to do a certain amount and then a certain amount and then a certain amount, so you get them faster. And you can calculate out flow rates and figure out approximate times to get stuff and in completion, and so you get a better idea. But if you're not making them and somebody else is making them, then they're going to be coming up with this. But these are things to consider as well. And once again, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. All of these are complications and issues that have to be thought of. And so when you go to start a business of any kind, especially when you're product business, you have to look at these aspects. And then you could go on the one last step, where when you begin to need help and workers, well, then you have human resources. And then you go into hiring workers. And that's a competition all in itself, because you have to attract quality workers. Oftentimes, I've heard so many managers look at their employees and say, oh, well, it's just an employee, I can just hire another one. And I could only shake my head, because that, no matter how you look at it, that's not true. There are certain employees who are significantly better at their positions than other employees, and that's a fact. And so if you treat your employees who have been trained and understand what they're doing, they're going to stay with you longer. And an employee that stays with you longer costs you less in the long run. And so if you are considering giving benefits and raises and so on, you have to look at the point of not increasing their pay, but you look at, all right, well, how productive are they? If I have to hire somebody new, what kind of risk am I taking on? Am I going to get the same amount of productivity? How long is it going to take me to train them? Are they going to stay with me for a very long time, or am I going to have to train somebody else? And so when you're looking at giving somebody a raise who's a really fantastic employee, too often it's it's $1 more an hour, or it's $2 more an hour. And yeah, it is in the labor hours they are there, but you're not looking at the bigger picture. You really do need to consider, okay, well, what has my average turnover been? How much does it cost me to train those people? Have I gotten better productivity out of just everyone else, or has this specific employee actually given me 25 or 30% more productivity? These all have value for your company, that when you look at it long-term, long run, if they're going to stay with you, and if they're a good employee and have been with you, then odds are they're going to, but you can actually justify paying them that little bit more. Better quality, more productivity, that oftentimes goes hand in hand with less errors, less material waste, which is less cost. And so that's another aspect that you start to go into. I mean, not even to talk about other benefits or things that might be offered and to hold on to employees, or how to actually attract them in. But that's another aspect. And all of these are then obviously kind of run through the finance and accounting area. And you're evaluating, well, just like I said, every decision you make, I mean, it can be evaluated for its cost to benefit. Are you going to get something out of it? Is it going to be a waste of time? Is it going to be a waste of money? And that doesn't matter whether you're going to attempt, like I said, new product lines, or you're going to evaluate its benefit. Are you going to build another factory, add more machines, hire more workers. All of these things can be evaluated. And of course, they can all, a number of these things can be run through resource software planning. But if you don't understand what the basis is and where it's coming from in the first place, the resource software planning might not be as effective for making a decision as you would like, and you may not get what you expect, which is why you hire consultants in the first place. Anyway, let me think. I think that covers the aspects of your business. And with my little end segment on technology, you can keep watching to see that. I think that covers some thoughts and concepts that go into what a business entails and what you might have to consider when you're actually going into a business. People ask, and oftentimes probably consider, as a consultant, what can you do for a business? And I think too often today, really what happens, it seems like the bigger consulting firms push technology on you as a company. And then basically sign you to contracts to teach you how to use it. Sometimes this can be a good thing, sometimes it can be a bad thing. I think in business, whenever you're making decisions, you always have to kind of weigh out your cost-benefit analysis and to see how much it helps you. Since I kind of started in here, I'm just going to make a commentary on technology. Technology has always been a product. The idea of technology is that it's supposed to save your company money. The only base thing that it really saves you is probably the most important component and resource that goes in any company, and that's time. Time costs money, no matter where it's at. Making decisions, making products, waiting for supplies, shipping them out, it's time. It's always time. And waiting for the coordination between departments to make decisions, that costs time. Technology was always supposed to be there to save time. And that's really the way you have to look at it. Can it save you time? How does it save you time? And then beyond that, how applicable it is to your company and the different scenarios that you're going to be using it for. Of course, over a couple of decades of having resource planning software, it's come a long ways, and you can set up stuff exactly how you want it to be set up for different functional areas. They have it set up for different industries, which is all fantastic, and it's all great. Different levels of companies can use it and so on. But you still, no matter what, in the end, you have to weigh out whether or not it's something that your company can make use of, and how do you make use of it. And then to go beyond that, when you actually start implementing things or creating your own applications or picking from the applications that are already available for your company or for your industry, do you really understand what it is that it's set up to tell you, especially when you're doing decision analysis? The things that you set up yourself, no big deal. You know exactly what goes into them. But some analysis can pose issues if you don't know what the basis for the analysis is. And early on in resource planning software, that's what you saw. A lot of money lost, huge amounts of capital, and some on the verge of bankruptcy, and blame their resource planning software. Of course, that doesn't really happen near as often anymore, because you, like any good product maker, you iron out those mistakes and you make it better so you can present it. And so that's what a lot of the software planning companies did. However, that aside, you still have to understand what goes into the analysis when you're using somebody else's applications. And one of the things, the reason why I bring this up is because I've seen where companies go in and they implement software because for their particular industry, they're told that it will reap them the benefits of what they're missing. just for a reference point, we'll just say you set up your allowance for doubtful accounts, because I won't really go deep into the industry, but you know exactly how much you're missing. I mean, pretty assuredly year to year, you know what you're missing, and most of it comes in because when you go to claim payments, there's something wrong with the claim. I mean, this happens in a lot of times with financial industries and insurance companies and so on. But you know what you're missing, and so same thing if you knew your doubtful accounts and you knew you were missing, 4% of your receivables, and that's pretty much right on all the time, year after year. You already know exactly what you can get back for the most part. I mean, even if you calculate in your growth, you know what you're getting back. I mean, these are all really basic math. And so when you go to implement some kind of software, and it's sold to you by a consulting firm, then the real big kicker is, what does it cost to install it? When is it going to be obsolete? How hostage are you to the software? And how long is it going to take you to reap the benefits? Because, like I said, you know what you're getting back. But it's amazing how many companies, especially mid-range to slightly larger ones, don't examine this whatsoever. They just simply take, hey, it's technology, sign me up for it, send it in. And the technology can end up costing you more labor hours. It might not have metrics set up, and the metrics that are set up might not be reasonable for your given operations. There's all kinds of issues that go wrong with this, and I just simply think that a deeper evaluation of what goes into it is necessary. Cost benefit for every decision that you make, and that's the safest route to go with it. You cannot just simply say, oh, tech, and it's going to be great. And I really think that we've come to a point now where the pushing of the AI is over the top. It reminds me of 3D in film, when every 10 years they came out with another phase of 3D movies, and I think it had been going on since the late 70s or early 80s. Every time it goes away again, and the technology keeps getting better, but it's just not appealing. But it's a similar concept with AI. And yes, you can have programs that have quote unquote conversations with people, but this isn't nearly as impressive as you might want to believe that it is. The basis for human interaction is not complex. I had worked the door a long time in college, and I'm sure a lot of people when they were in college worked restaurant and customer service industries and such, and you learn about interactions, and early on, if you pay attention at all to people's behavior, it's fairly simple to figure out a conversation and what the person or what the customer is kind of desiring. You start out with a conversation, and the more lengthy the answer is, the more into that particular topic the customer is. It's not difficult to figure out. If they give shorter answers, then they're probably, you're getting colder, and so you have to veer back a different direction. And it's no different when you're writing, software to do interactions. I mean, human behavior is not that difficult to pick up. They always say a person's favorite topic is themselves. Well, obviously, if you start asking questions about somebody's, and if they're open to talking about themselves, absolutely, right away they'll start talking about themselves. Maybe they say a key phrase, and then you start asking questions about their particular interest in that area. Well, that runs you on a whole nother chain of conversation. And so if you look at it from the aspect of a computer, and you're picking out keywords, key phrases, and then you ask questions along those, once your AI has developed conversational abilities, then that's how it runs. That's how it goes. I know it's more complex than that, but the basic concept itself isn't, and neither is human to human interaction. It isn't that complicated. So when you go over the top with these things, you have to take it at what it actually is doing for you. Can it sell products when you're not there? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, that can do that. Can it save you time and can it save you money doing that? Yeah, yes, it can. But that's an evaluation. That's what you have to think about. When you're actually using technology within a company to make decisions, I still am of the old analog belief that when you jump to a technology after you've understood how to do something in the analog version, you appreciate that technology a lot more, but you also know how to use and manipulate that technology much more effectively. And by doing so, that makes your decisions faster. You can experiment with many more different options or strategies and see how they play out, all because you don't have to do it the analog way, say on pen and paper, and you actually can use the tools and applications to do the calculations for you much more quickly. I mean, think if you're doing simulations and you're running probability theories on buying a product versus another product, given certain scenarios within the environment of that product, different advertising or so on, advertising expenditures and all that kind of stuff, maybe retail support or what have you. And so you can actually do that analysis. And if you had to do it by hand, wow, that would take you a long, long time. But could you? Yeah, absolutely. You still can. The technology saves you time. But if you're relying on the computer to spit this stuff out to you, do you really understand what's going into it? Do you know what the tools are that the computer is using to create the data on the end after the analysis? Do you know what it means? Do you understand how, the difference? I like the stata models because they use your probit or your logit, and you get decision theories or simultaneous equations and how different areas will affect other areas, and find out what kind of an effect those different areas are having on each other and what you can expect, and whether they're have some kind of a positive outcome on the other end. Or you can study the diminishing returns on relational expenditures or categories or whatever. And so that kind of stuff it's fantastic. But if you don't know what diminishing marginal returns are, does it really help you? Do you really know where this came from? And so there's always a point where your technology is too much, and it's not going to help you, and if you actually don't understand what's going on. I get that's. Don't get me wrong, I like technology, but you have to understand the basics in order to utilize the tools. It's like changing a tire. You could pull out that old little lug nut cross wrench that's in the trunk and try to do it by hand, or if you came out with a little air gun, you go zip, 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 and it all comes off. It's no big deal. All right, great. Either way, you still have to understand the process of how to take it off. It can be much quicker one way than the other, and you can save time and probably not get as dirty. But if you don't understand the process, it doesn't matter. It doesn't help you in either case. I don't know if that's an oversimplification. I don't really necessarily think it is, but hopefully you get my point when it comes to technology.